Did someone lose their assistant, or did you just wander in here by mistake? Grant Holloway leaned back in his leather chair, laughing as his eyes dragged over Naomi Bell like she didn't belong in the room she was standing in. The sound spread, low chuckles, knowing smirks, while the silence around her stretched tight. Dean Rourke didn't even look at her, just tapped his pen against the table like she was already wasting his time. "We're in the middle of executive business," he added, voice flat with dismissal. "You people should really learn boundaries." Naomi stood still, her posture unshaken, her blazer sharp against the tension in the room, but to them, all they saw was someone they had already decided couldn't possibly have power. The irony sat heavy in her silence, because every man in that room was seconds away from discovering they had just laughed at the only person who could end their careers. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Wexler & Dunn Global Boardroom, casting long rectangles across the polished mahogany table. Naomi Bell paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. 12 men in nearly identical suits sat around the table, their faces a mix of boredom and mild curiosity. Grant Holloway, with his silver-flecked hair and practiced smile, caught Dean Rourke's eye across the table. The small smirk they shared wasn't lost on Naomi. She had seen that look countless times before. The silent communication between men who believed they owned the room. Naomi straightened the lapel of her dark-tailored blazer, smoothed a hand over her deep red dress, and walked in with deliberate steps. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, breaking the murmur of conversation. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and measured. Heads turned, eyes flicked over her, assessing, dismissing. Grant Holloway leaned back in his chair, a half-smile playing on his lips. Naomi extended her hand to him first. "Naomi Bell." Grant glanced at her hand, then looked past her toward the door as if expecting someone else to enter. A soft chuckle escaped his lips as he turned to the man beside him. "Did HR send you? Or are you from that diversity initiative?" The chuckle rippled around the table. Not outright laughter, but something worse. Amusement carefully wrapped in corporate politeness. Some men hid their smiles behind coffee cups. Others studied their tablets with sudden interest. Naomi let her hand drop to her side. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile to ease their comfort. She simply stood, studying each face in turn, memorizing the expressions, the postures, the alliances visible in seating arrangements. "The table's full today," Dean Rourke said, gesturing vaguely toward the wall. "There might be chairs along the back for observers." Another wave of quiet amusement passed through the room. Grant tapped his pen against the table. "We're actually waiting for some important leadership decisions this morning, so if you're with HR, maybe circle back after lunch. New hires usually check in at reception first," someone else added. Naomi set her leather portfolio on the table and unzipped it with unhurried precision. The room went quiet as she extracted a document folder with the company logo embossed in gold. "I'm not new to executive leadership," Naomi said, her voice carrying without strain. She slid the documents forward, spreading them in a neat fan. "But I am new to Wexler & Dunn Global. Effective as of 8 o'clock this morning, I'm your new Chief Executive Officer." The silence that followed was absolute. Coffee cups froze halfway to mouths. Pens stopped mid-tap. Every set of eyes fixed on the papers before them. Board resolutions, signed transfers of authority, official announcements ready for release. "This is," Dean Rourke began, his face flushing. "This is irregular. The board hasn't finalized." "The board vote was completed last night," Naomi said. "Special session. Called under Bylaw 5.3, which allows for emergency leadership transitions with controlling interest approval." She looked directly at Dean. "Evelyn Price exercised her controlling shares." "Evelyn doesn't have controlling interest," Grant said sharply. "That arrangement ended when Harold died." Check the trust documents again, Naomi replied. She retained 46% voting power. Combined with 3 independent board members, that's more than enough. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Faces that had been smiling minutes ago now hardened into masks of disbelief and hostility. Grant's practiced charm vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I'll be implementing immediate operational reviews," Naomi continued, refusing to yield the floor. "Starting with the Legacy Division financials and the proposed restructuring plans currently under wraps." She opened her tablet. "I've scheduled individual meetings with each department head this week." Dean Rourke's knuckles whitened as he gripped his pen. "Ms. Bell, perhaps we should discuss the transition privately. These gentlemen have projects in motion that require delicate handling." "These gentlemen report to me now," Naomi said, not unkindly, but firmly. "And it's Ms. Bell in public settings, Dean. Naomi in private ones." She watched their faces as reality settled in. They weren't laughing anymore, but something worse had taken its place. She recognized the shift, the mental calculations, the reassessments, the formation of new strategies. These men might have lost this battle, but they were already planning the next one. The next hour proceeded with tense efficiency as Naomi outlined her initial priorities. She noted who spoke up, who remained silent, who exchanged glances. The power had shifted, but the room's allegiance had not. As the meeting adjourned, executives filed out with stiff nods and muttered excuses. Naomi gathered her documents, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. In the glass reflection of the wall, she saw Dean Rourke pull Grant Holloway aside near the door. Dean's mouth moved urgently, his hand gripping Grant's elbow. Grant's face, once so amused at her presence, now showed something harder as he nodded at whatever Dean was whispering. The laughter was gone, but something colder had taken its place. Naomi walked out of the boardroom, her shoulders back and chin high. The glass walls had turned their meeting into a fishbowl exhibition for the entire executive floor. She felt eyes following her, curious, judging, measuring. Employees pretended to be busy when she glanced their way, suddenly fascinated by computer screens or shuffling papers with newfound urgency. The executive assistant stationed outside what was now her office stood up quickly. "Ms. Bell," she said, clearly unsure of the proper protocol. "I'm Patricia. I've been assigned to assist you during the transition." Naomi nodded. "Thank you, Patricia. I'll need the quarterly reports from the last 2 years on my desk within the hour." "Of course," Patricia replied, her eyes darting nervously to something behind Naomi. Footsteps approached from behind, 2 sets, moving with purpose. Grant and Dean had followed her from the boardroom, their faces professionally blank, but tension evident in the rigid set of their shoulders. "Naomi," Grant said, using her first name with forced familiarity. "We should discuss your transition plan before you make any announcements." Dean nodded. "The staff will have questions. We need to manage expectations." "My office," Naomi said simply, gesturing them inside. The CEO's office was spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Harold Voss's personal items had been cleared out, leaving behind generic corporate art and empty shelves. The room felt hollow, waiting for a new identity. "I'd appreciate seeing your transition strategy," Dean said, settling into a chair without being invited to sit. "These first days are critical for market confidence." Grant leaned against the wall. The team's used to a certain management style. Harold was hands-off with day-to-day operations. "Is that your approach as well?" The question carried weight. Was she planning to disrupt their fiefdoms? "My approach," Naomi said, taking her seat behind the desk, "is to understand what works and what doesn't. Starting with the financial discrepancies in the Q3 reports." Dean's expression flickered. "Discrepancies?" "The variance between reported operational expenses and actual cash flow in the Legacy Division. There's a $7 million gap that doesn't appear in the shareholder statements but shows up in the internal ledgers." Naomi pulled up the figures on her tablet. I reviewed all public filings before accepting this position. Grant and Dean exchanged a quick glance. That's a routine allocation issue, Dean recovered smoothly. We shift certain expenses between quarters to balance seasonal fluctuations. Across fiscal years? Naomi asked. The pattern goes back 3 years, Dean. Each time, funds move through the same 3 subsidiary accounts before disappearing from tracking. The surprise on their faces lasted only seconds before professional masks slipped back into place. I'd be happy to walk you through our accounting practices, Dean said, his tone suggesting she was missing something basic. But perhaps your focus should be on the public announcement of your appointment. The optics are important. The market will react to how we frame this change. Grant nodded. We've drafted a statement highlighting your experience while emphasizing continuity. Shareholders hate uncertainty. Naomi placed her hands flat on the desk. The statement will go out today. But before that, I'm ordering a complete internal audit of all divisions, starting with legacy operations. Patricia is gathering the files now. Dean's smile tightened. That seems premature. The regular audit cycle has been consistently delayed for the past 2 years, Naomi finished. Not anymore. The 2 men left minutes later, courtesy intact, but hostility barely concealed. Through the glass walls, Naomi watched them stop at a workstation, speaking quietly to a nervous-looking man in IT. Word spread through the office like ripples in still water. Some employees glanced at her with cautious hope. Others huddled in small groups, whispering. A few nodded respectfully when she passed their desks later that morning, while others suddenly found reasons to look down at their keyboards. Fear had seeped into the building's foundation, becoming part of its culture. Naomi could taste it in the air, people afraid to speak, to question, to step out of line. Her phone rang shortly before noon. They didn't take it well, Evelyn Price said without preamble, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone who had wielded power for decades. No, Naomi agreed. They didn't. I forced the vote through last night. 3 board members sided with me. Enough with my shares to make it happen. Evelyn paused. They won't accept you quietly, Naomi. Dean has been running things behind the scenes for years. Grant thinks he deserved the promotion. I expected resistance. Expect sabotage, Evelyn corrected. Harold protected them. They protected each other. That's how it worked. Not anymore, Naomi said. After lunch, Naomi sat at her computer reviewing personnel files, noting patterns in promotions and departures. The screen flickered once, then again. Her login credentials suddenly required re-entry. When she signed back in, the personnel database showed an error message. The files she'd been reviewing, records of employees who had left the company under unusual circumstances, were no longer accessible. System maintenance, the error message claimed. But Naomi knew better. Someone was already working against her. Naomi stood over her desk, phone pressed to her ear, watching the error message mock her from the screen. Files that had been accessible moments ago now refused to load. I understand you're experiencing technical difficulties, Ms. Bell, the IT specialist said, his voice oddly careful. It appears to be a temporary sync issue with the executive server. A sync issue that only affects personnel files from the last 5 years? Naomi asked, her tone measured despite her rising suspicion. Sometimes, certain file types are more vulnerable during updates. Naomi watched the young man's reflection in her office window. He shifted his weight, eyes darting toward Dean Rourke's office. I'd like the access logs for the executive server, she said, for the past 24 hours. A pause. That would require approval from... I'm the CEO, Naomi said, her voice firm but not raised. I don't need approval to view system logs for a network I'm responsible for. Yes, ma'am. I'll have those sent over right away. Naomi set down the phone and turned to Patricia, her assistant who had transferred with her from her previous position. Patricia, has anyone tried to access my calendar or email settings today? The woman nodded. It sent 3 requests for routine configuration. I denied them per your instructions. Good. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Naomi picked it up, her expression unchanging as she read the headline. Wexler and Dunn appoints surprise CEO. Experience questions surface. The article was carefully worded but unmistakable in its intent, framing her as a diversity hire pushed through by Evelyn Price without proper vetting. It quoted sources close to the board, expressing concern about her qualifications to lead a company of this size. Less than 4 hours after her appointment, and already a coordinated attack was underway, both inside the company and in the press. This wasn't random resistance. This was planned. Naomi straightened her blazer and headed down the hallway toward the CFO's office. Dean Rourke looked up with practiced surprise when she appeared in his doorway. Naomi, please come in, he said, gesturing to a chair with the easy confidence of someone used to controlling rooms. I was just about to check in with you. Were you? Naomi remained standing. I'm having some interesting technical issues, Dean. Files disappearing, access being restricted. Dean's expression shifted to concern. That's troubling. IT has been upgrading our security protocols. I'll make sure they prioritize your access. Someone also seems to be feeding information to the business press, Naomi continued, watching his face closely. Casting doubt on my appointment. I saw that, Dean said, shaking his head. Disgraceful. Unfortunately, transitions can bring out insecurities in people. Some feel threatened by change. His performance was flawless, the right words, the right expressions, but his eyes were calculating, assessing her response. Indeed, Naomi said. I'd like you to join me for a staff meeting at 3. We need to address these issues directly. Something flashed behind Dean's eyes. Perhaps we should prepare more thoroughly before 3 o'clock, Naomi repeated, turning to leave. She found Grant Holloway by the executive break room, chatting amiably with 2 senior managers who quickly excused themselves when she approached. Quite the first day, Grant said, his smile not reaching his eyes. I saw that hit piece online. Best to ignore these distractions and focus on the transition. It's not a distraction, Grant. It's a coordinated effort to undermine me before I've even started. Naomi met his gaze directly. Staff meeting at 3. I expect all department heads to attend. At 3 sharp, Naomi stood before the gathered employees in the largest conference room. Nearly 60 people crowded inside, with more watching through the glass walls. By now, most of you have heard about my appointment, she began. Some of you may have questions about what this means for Wexler and Dunn. Let me be clear. I'm here because this company has tremendous potential that isn't being realized. She noticed Grant and Dean standing at the back, arms crossed, watching her closely. Starting today, we're implementing new transparency standards. All departmental reviews will be conducted with multi-level teams. Financial reporting will follow stricter verification protocols, and any employee who identifies inefficiencies or concerns will have direct access to report them. A murmur spread through the room. Some employees straightened in their seats, while others glanced nervously at their bosses. Change isn't always comfortable, Naomi continued, but it's necessary. Wexler and Dunn has operated in certain ways for a long time. Some of those ways have held us back. She saw hope flicker across some faces, fear across others. The company culture had trained people to protect those in power, to look the other way, to stay silent. Breaking that pattern wouldn't happen overnight. Driving home that evening, Naomi felt unsettled. The day had confirmed her suspicions about resistance, but something felt deeper, more sinister than mere resentment of her authority. The coordinated nature of the pushback, the missing files, the press leaks. This was more than hurt egos. She pulled into the driveway of her mother's house, where she'd been staying temporarily, while searching for a place closer to the office. Loretta Bell was sitting on the porch, reading glasses perched on her nose, a book open in her lap. "You're late," Loretta said, as Naomi climbed the steps. Rough first day? Naomi sat beside her mother, suddenly deciding she needed to share everything. There was something wrong inside that company, something beyond the obvious resistance to her leadership, and her mother's wisdom might help her see what she was missing. "Mom," she said quietly, "I need to tell you about Wexler and Dunn. All of it." The kitchen in Loretta Bell's modest home felt smaller tonight. Yellow light from the hanging fixture cast warm shadows across the well-worn table where mother and daughter sat facing each other, steam rising from mugs of chamomile tea. Naomi had loosened her tailored blazer, but still looked every inch the CEO, even as exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. "They laughed, Mom." "Right to my face," Naomi said, fingers tightening around her mug. "Like I was some joke walking into that boardroom." Loretta nodded, her eyes sharp despite her 68 years. "Men like that always laugh until they can't anymore. Then I told them who I was, and you should have seen their faces." Naomi allowed herself a small smile. But it didn't last. By afternoon, someone had locked me out of critical files. An article appeared online calling me a token hire. It was coordinated, planned. Loretta's hand trembled slightly as she set her mug down. Something in her expression shifted, a tightening around her mouth, a distance entering her eyes. "What is it?" Naomi asked, noticing immediately. Loretta folded her hands on the table, her wedding ring, worn even 15 years after Naomi's father passed, catching the light. "That building. Wexler and Dunn." She paused. "I cleaned it, back in the 90s. Naomi stared at her mother. "You cleaned the Wexler and Dunn headquarters? You never told me that." "It wasn't something I wanted to remember." Loretta's voice grew quieter. "I was working 2 jobs then. You were just finishing high school. The night shift paid better. But why wouldn't you mention it when I told you about the job offer?" Loretta's eyes met Naomi's directly. "Because I heard things there. Things I've tried to forget for 25 years. The kitchen seemed to grow still. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, the sound distant and unimportant. "What kind of things, Mom?" Loretta took a deep breath. It was late, maybe 2 in the morning. I was cleaning the executive floor when I heard shouting coming from one of the conference rooms. The door wasn't fully closed. Naomi leaned forward. There were 3 men arguing with a younger man. They were talking about land deals in Riverside Heights. "The old black neighborhood that got redeveloped?" Naomi asked. Loretta nodded. They'd forged signatures on transfer papers, took pension money from their own workers to finance it. The younger man, he had papers, evidence, said he wouldn't be part of it. Naomi felt cold despite the warm kitchen. What happened to him? They threatened him, told him to think about his family. Loretta's voice grew flat. A week later, they found him dead. Company called it an accident. Said he fell down the stairs after working late. "Oh my God," Naomi whispered. "Did you tell anyone?" Shame crossed Loretta's face. "One of them saw me the next night. Didn't say anything directly. Just mentioned how hard it would be for a single mother to find another good-paying job. Asked about my smart daughter heading to college." The threat, unspoken but clear, hung in the air between them. "I was scared, baby. I had you to think about." Tears gathered in Loretta's eyes. "I told myself it wasn't my business, that maybe I misunderstood." Naomi reached across the table, taking her mother's hand. "You were protecting me." "I understand. There's more." Loretta's voice cracked. "The young man who died, his name was Marcus Johnson." The name hit Naomi like a physical blow. "Dad's friend Marcus? The one from the old photos?" Loretta nodded. "Your father's best friend since elementary school. They played basketball together every Sunday. I remember him coming to our house," Naomi said slowly, memories surfacing. "He always brought me books. Then he just stopped coming. Because he died, baby. After your father got sick, Marcus promised to look out for us. He took that job at Wexler and Dunn to make good money, help with your college." Loretta wiped a tear. "And when he found out what they were doing?" stealing from black families, from their own workers. He couldn't stay quiet. The kitchen fell silent as the full weight of revelation settled between them. Naomi sat motionless, connecting pieces long separated. The company she now led wasn't just resistant to her leadership. It was built on corruption, theft, and possibly murder. And that corruption had touched her family directly. All these years, Naomi finally said, all those families pushed out of their homes, the pensions that disappeared, and Wexler and Dunn just kept growing, getting richer. Now you see why I couldn't tell you. When you said you got that job offer, Loretta shook her head. I was terrified. But you're stronger than I was. Naomi straightened in her chair, her purpose crystallizing. This isn't just about surviving their attacks or proving I belong in that office. This is about justice for Marcus, for those families, for everyone they've hurt. They're dangerous people, Naomi, Loretta warned. Powerful men who've buried their secrets for decades. And I'm the CEO now. Determination hardened Naomi's voice. I have access they never thought someone like me would get. They laughed when I walked in that room because they still think they're untouchable. Outside, night had fully descended, the kitchen windows reflecting their images back at them. Naomi stood, gathering her things with new resolve. I need to go through every file, every contract from that period, she said. There will be traces, evidence they couldn't completely erase. Loretta stood too, her eyes both proud and afraid. Be careful, baby. They've silenced people before. I'm not going to be silenced. Naomi embraced her mother tightly. And I'm not just running their company now. I'm going to expose what they built it on. As she stepped out into the night, Naomi felt the weight of responsibility and purpose settle on her shoulders. The path ahead was dangerous, but clear. This wasn't just business anymore. This was unfinished justice, waiting 25 years to be served. The elevator doors opened silently as Naomi stepped into the empty executive floor. It was barely 6:30 a.m. The offices wouldn't fill for another hour, which was exactly why she'd come so early. She needed time alone in the building, away from watchful eyes and convenient interruptions. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she walked to her office. Yesterday's revelation from her mother had changed everything. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. This was about exposing decades of corruption and finding justice for Marcus and all the others who had been silenced. Naomi settled at her desk, immediately opening her computer and typing out a formal directive. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with purpose. A comprehensive audit of all company land acquisitions and financial transactions dating back 30 years, with specific focus on the neighborhood development project her mother had mentioned. She pressed send just as her phone rang. It was Dean Rourke. Naomi, his voice was carefully controlled, I've just received your audit directive. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Dean, Naomi replied calmly. I want those records pulled immediately. This kind of wide-reaching investigation creates enormous legal exposure, Dean said. As CFO, I strongly advise against— I didn't ask for your advice, Naomi cut in. I gave you an instruction. Have the preliminary files on my desk by noon. She hung up before he could respond. Within minutes, her door burst open. Grant Holloway stood there, not bothering to knock. This audit is a disaster waiting to happen, he said, closing the door behind him. You're going to tank our stock price over some wild fishing expedition. Naomi looked at him steadily. Interesting that you're so worried about an audit, Grant. Most executives welcome financial transparency. Don't play games, Grant snapped. This company has legal obligations to shareholders. We can't waste resources chasing ghosts from 30 years ago. They're not ghosts if the bodies are still buried in our books, Naomi replied. The audit proceeds. That's final. After Grant stormed out, Naomi sent an email requesting all compliance personnel meet her in the small conference room at 9. If answers existed, they would be in the numbers, and someone in compliance might already know more than they were saying. When 9 o'clock came, 6 nervous-looking employees filed in. Most were mid-level managers who spoke carefully, offering technical information while avoiding anything controversial. But one young woman caught Naomi's attention. She sat at the far end, taking notes but rarely speaking, her eyes darting up occasionally as if wanting to say something. As the meeting ended, Naomi called out, "Ms. Reed, could you stay a moment?" The young woman froze, then nodded as others filed out. "It's Tessa, right?" Naomi asked once they were alone. "Yes, Tessa Reed, compliance analyst, level 2. Her voice was soft but clear. "You seem to have thoughts you didn't share during our meeting," Naomi said directly. Tessa glanced toward the door. She hesitated. "I've noticed some irregularities in vendor payment structures, especially relating to older projects." "What kind of irregularities?" "Shell companies." Tessa's voice dropped lower. "Payments routed through entities that seem to exist only on paper. They link back to land acquisitions from the West Side redevelopment." Naomi felt a jolt of recognition. The West Side, exactly where her mother had mentioned. "Show me," Naomi said. Tessa hesitated. "Ma'am, people who dig into these records, they don't last here. 3 months ago, my supervisor was reassigned after questioning similar patterns." "I'm not just your boss, Tessa. I'm your CEO," Naomi said firmly. "You'll have protection." Tessa nodded slowly. "I'll compile what I've found and bring it to your office." By midday, 3 separate board members had called to express concerns about the audit. The last one, Martin Finch, was bluntest. "Naomi, you need to slow down," he said. "This aggressive approach is creating unnecessary tension." "Unnecessary for whom, Martin?" Naomi asked. "For everyone. The company has settled history. Digging it up now serves no productive purpose." "I disagree," Naomi said simply. "Good governance requires transparency." After hanging up, Naomi knew she couldn't rely solely on official channels. The resistance was too coordinated, too immediate. Someone would find a way to sanitize the records before she saw them. She began quietly downloading copies of everything Tessa brought her, saving backup files to a secured external drive. She reached out to former employees who had left under questionable circumstances, building her own informal network of information. By late afternoon, Naomi was alone in her office reviewing the partial financial records Tessa had provided. The evidence was fragmented but damning. A web of shell companies with obscured ownership, millions funneled through entities that dissolved once transactions completed. The West Side acquisition showed grossly deflated property valuations, followed by immediate high-value resales. Naomi leaned back, the weight of what she was seeing settling into her bones. This wasn't just financial misconduct. This was calculated theft, from families, from pension holders, from an entire community. The more she dug, the clearer the picture became. Not accidental or opportunistic corruption, but a deliberate, massive scheme designed to extract wealth while leaving no fingerprints. Someone had architected this entire system. Someone still in this building was protecting it, and they would do anything to keep their secrets buried. The office quieted as evening descended. Most employees had gone home, leaving the hallways dim and still. Naomi remained in her office, surrounded by stacks of financial reports, acquisition documents, and land transfer records. Her jacket hung over the back of her chair, and her half-empty coffee had long gone cold. The day had been a brutal exercise in corporate politics. That morning's investor briefing still burned in her mind. She had been midway through presenting her strategic vision when Grant Holloway rose smoothly from his seat, approaching the podium with practiced confidence. "What Naomi is trying to say," he'd interrupted, placing a hand on the edge of her presentation table, "is that we're pivoting toward market-responsive supply chains. My operations team has been developing this approach for months. The room had shifted attention to him instantly. Naomi watched as investors nodded approvingly at Grant, even though he was repackaging her exact words. Actually, Naomi had said clearly, this strategy wasn't developed by operations. It's based on my assessment of our competitive weaknesses, which I completed last week. The silence that followed felt loaded. She saw investors exchange glances. Grant's smile tightened microscopically. Naomi certainly brings a fresh perspective, he recovered smoothly. We're all collaborating on implementation details. Now, hours later, the Business Journal's headline glared from her tablet. Tensions flare as new CEO shows combative approach. The article praised Grant's spirited contributions while describing her as defensive and struggling to maintain control. Naomi pushed the tablet away. She'd seen this playbook throughout her career. Speak up, get labeled difficult. Stay quiet. Become invisible. The rules were designed for her to lose either way. A soft knock at her door pulled her from these thoughts. Come in, she called. Tessa Reed entered, clutching a manila folder to her chest. She glanced nervously down the hallway before closing the door. I found more, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. These are payment authorizations from the pension fund investments tied to the West Side project. The signatures don't match other documents from the same executives. Naomi took the folder. You're taking a risk bringing this directly. Tessa's face tightened. They've already started. This morning, HR called me about anonymous complaints regarding my work behavior. My security clearance was temporarily suspended for routine review. My immediate supervisor suggested I might be happier in another department. That was fast, Naomi observed, anger rising in her chest. This is how it works here. They don't fire people like me outright. They make us uncomfortable until we leave voluntarily. It's happening because someone saw us talking yesterday. Naomi studied the young analyst. I promised you protection, and I meant it. With respect, ma'am, you've been CEO for 2 days. Their system has been in place for decades. Tessa's hands trembled slightly. I believe in what you're doing, but they've already begun constructing a file against me. They're experts at this. Naomi nodded, understanding the truth in Tessa's words. Her authority was real, but fragile. Without concrete proof of wrongdoing, any move she made to shield Tessa could be countered with bureaucratic maneuvering. Keep your head down for now, Naomi advised. Document everything. Forward your emails to your personal account if you feel your access might be cut. I'm moving as quickly as I can. After Tessa left, Naomi returned to the documents. The pattern was becoming clearer, complex, but deliberate. She opened her laptop, creating a timeline of transactions. Money flowed from pension accounts into investment vehicles that somehow always lost value when investing in certain properties. Those same properties were then acquired by shell companies at bargain prices. The shell companies transferred ownership to other entities, which then flipped the properties to developers at massive profits. The profits never returned to the original pension investors. At the center of many transactions sat a recurring signature, Dean Rourke's mentor, the previous CFO. Naomi cross-referenced dates, noting how each questionable transaction corresponded with leadership changes, market downturns, or moments of company crisis, perfect cover for hiding financial manipulation. The redevelopment of West Side wasn't a one-off scheme. It was the most visible example of a system operating continuously for over 20 years. Money had been siphoned from pension holders, from property owners, from the company itself, all flowing toward a small group of insiders who protected each other. The whistleblower her mother had mentioned, the friend of her father, had apparently seen just one piece of this massive puzzle. What would have happened if he had lived to expose it all? Naomi leaned back, stretching her tight shoulders. The office was completely silent now. The night deepened outside her windows. She stared at the complex web of transactions she'd mapped out on her computer screen. This wasn't just about land or money. This was about power. systematically stealing it from the vulnerable while ensuring nobody could trace the theft. She now understood why they had laughed when she entered the boardroom. It wasn't just sexism or racism, though those were certainly factors. They had laughed because they believed their system was impenetrable. They thought themselves untouchable. She glanced at her watch. Nearly midnight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but now, at least, she knew what she was fighting. Not isolated corruption, but an entire ecosystem designed to protect itself. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window of Loretta's small house. Naomi sat at the familiar wooden table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She had called her mother early, asking to stop by before heading to the office. There were questions she couldn't wait to ask. Loretta placed a plate of toast between them, her movements slower than usual. The weight of old memories seemed to press on her shoulders. "His name was Marcus Johnson," Loretta said finally, settling into her chair. "He and your father grew up together. Same neighborhood, same schools." Naomi felt her throat tighten. "You never told me about him before." There was nothing good to tell, just pain. Loretta's eyes grew distant. Marcus was smart, college-educated, got himself a good job at Wexler and Dunn in accounting. He was so proud. First in his family to work there. Naomi waited, giving her mother space to continue at her own pace. He started noticing things in the books. Numbers that didn't add up. Money moving where it shouldn't. Loretta's voice hardened. When they started buying up properties in our neighborhood for that big expansion, offering people pennies for their homes, Marcus saw how they were financing it, using pension money that wasn't theirs to take. And he tried to stop it, Naomi said softly. Loretta nodded. He came to your father first. Wanted advice. Your father told him to gather evidence, do things proper. Marcus started collecting documents. She paused, her hand trembling slightly. Then, one night, I was cleaning the executive floor. Heard shouting from behind a door. Marcus was arguing with 3 men. One was that Rourke man's mentor. They told Marcus he was mistaken, that he needed to drop it or he'd regret it. Naomi leaned forward. And, a week later, car accident, Loretta said flatly. Brakes failed, they said. Police never questioned it. But everyone knew. She reached across the table, clasping Naomi's hand. Your father never forgave himself for encouraging Marcus to speak up. He carried that guilt until the day he died. The connection struck Naomi like a physical blow. This wasn't just about corporate corruption anymore. This was personal. A debt of justice that had gone unpaid for decades. That's why you never told me where you used to work, Naomi said. You were protecting me. I was scared, Loretta admitted. Those men had power. But now you have power too. Her eyes sharpened with determination. Marcus deserves justice. All those families who lost their homes deserve justice. Naomi squeezed her mother's hand. I'll get it for them. I promise. At the office, Naomi moved with careful purpose. She knew the systems were likely monitored, her every move tracked. Still, she had advantages they didn't anticipate. She called in a trusted IT specialist from her previous company under the guise of transition support. While they worked on her office computer, she quietly secured backup access to the financial archives through an independent server. Ms. Bell? Naomi looked up to find Walter Stein, one of the older board members, standing uncertainly at her door. Do you have a moment? He asked, glancing nervously down the hallway. She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. Of course. Walter closed the door before sitting. His fingers drummed anxiously on his knee. I've been with this company for 30 years, he began. Seen a lot of changes. Naomi waited, giving him space to find his words. The old expansion, the one that put us on the map. He hesitated. There were questions raised at the time about financing, about the methods used to acquire that land. What kind of questions? Naomi asked evenly. Walter's gaze dropped to his hands, the kind that got shut down fast. The board was told everything was legal, just aggressive business. But some of us wondered. He looked up, his eyes troubled. A young accountant died around that time. After that, nobody asked questions anymore. "Why are you telling me this now?" Naomi asked, though she already knew. "Because I've been afraid for 25 years, he admitted. And I'm tired of being afraid. But," he leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper, "they'll bury you if they can. Just like they buried those questions. Just like they buried that young man." After Walter left, Naomi sat motionless, processing. Fear controlled everyone in this building, from board members to junior staff. The company operated on silent intimidation as much as on profit margins. She spent the afternoon diving deeper into the records she now had access to, working methodically, connecting dots that had been deliberately scattered. By late afternoon, hunched over her computer, she found it. The smoking gun. Financial reports from the pension fund during the expansion years. Money that should have been protected for retirees had been temporarily reallocated to finance land purchases and construction. The documents showed the initial diversion, but nothing showing the funds ever returned to their rightful place. The evidence was undeniable. Pension theft, fraud, possibly even manslaughter, if Marcus Johnson's death could be linked to his discovery. The company's celebrated expansion, the foundation of its current wealth and status, had been built on stolen money and silenced voices. Naomi sat back, the weight of the discovery pressing on her chest. The crime was right there in black and white, but still buried under layers of corporate protection, intimidation, and the passage of time. She knew what she had found. Now she had to figure out how to bring it to light without being silenced herself. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the blinds of the small conference room, casting striped shadows across the polished table. Naomi had deliberately chosen this room. Neutral territory, neither her office nor Dean's. With recording equipment she'd had IT verify was functioning properly. Dean Rourke entered with his usual measured confidence, straightening his already perfect tie. "Naomi, is this about the quarterly projections? I have those numbers ready." "Not exactly." Naomi gestured to the chair across from her. "Please, sit." Dean settled himself, arranging his notepad and pen with precision. His movements were controlled, methodical. A man who never left anything to chance. "I've been reviewing some historical financial patterns," Naomi began, keeping her tone conversational, "particularly around vendor relationships." Dean nodded slightly. "Part of your operational review, I assume?" "Yes." Naomi opened the folder in front of her. "I found something interesting about shell companies used during the expansion period." She slid 3 documents across the table. These vendor entities, Meridian Holdings, Westlake Development, and Summit Partners, received substantial payments for consulting services during the land acquisition phase. Dean barely glanced at them. "Historical vendors. Before my time as CFO." "But not before your time in the finance department," Naomi countered. "You were assistant director of special projects then." Something flickered behind Dean's eyes. So brief Naomi might have missed it if she hadn't been watching closely. A microscopic crack in his composure. "Your signature appears on these authorization forms," she continued, sliding another document forward. "And these same shell companies later funneled money that originated from the company's pension reserves." Dean's fingers twitched slightly against his pen. "These are complex historical transactions. Context matters." "Indeed it does." Naomi placed another document on the table. "This is a bank record showing transfers from those same entities to offshore accounts that later funded the company's land purchases. The money trail is quite clear." Dean's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're drawing connections between routine business operations from decades ago. This is hardly worth a private meeting." "I've scheduled a special board session for tomorrow morning," Naomi said, maintaining steady eye contact. I'll be presenting these findings, along with additional documentation. The room went silent. Dean's controlled expression slipped for just a second, revealing calculation, not fear. That seems premature, he said finally, voice even. These are complicated financial matters that could be misinterpreted. The board isn't equipped to evaluate this without proper context. I believe they'll find the context quite illuminating, Naomi replied, particularly when paired with what we've discovered about the manipulation of pension funds during that period. Dean's fingers stopped their drumming. His eyes narrowed slightly. We? My team has been thorough, Naomi said, deliberately vague. Dean straightened his papers, his movements still precise, but slightly faster. I'll need copies of everything you plan to present. You'll receive the full packet at the same time as the other board members, tomorrow morning. Dean stood, buttoning his jacket. I admire your diligence, Naomi. But digging up ancient history rarely benefits anyone. Companies evolve, practices change. Justice doesn't expire, Dean, Naomi said quietly. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Neither does liability for making unsubstantiated accusations. After Dean left, Naomi called Tessa to her office. The young analyst arrived clutching a tablet, her face both nervous and determined. I've secured the digital logs, Tessa said, without preamble. They prove someone accessed and altered financial records after your appointment was announced. The access credentials trace back to a terminal in the finance department. Can they be disputed? Naomi asked. Tessa shook her head. Not the server logs. Those are automatically archived off-site. That's why they missed them. Naomi felt the momentum shift. Tangible. Real. Good work. I need those ready for tomorrow's presentation. After Tessa left, Naomi made a call she'd been holding back on until she had concrete evidence. This is Investigator Collins, answered a clipped voice. This is Naomi Bell, CEO of Wexler and Dunn Global. I have information regarding historical financial fraud that I believe would interest your office. A pause. We've been aware of Wexler and Dunn for some time, Ms. Bell. Naomi's pulse quickened. You've been investigating them? Let's just say certain patterns have been noted. But without internal documentation, patterns remain just patterns. I have documentation, Naomi said. Substantial documentation. That would change things considerably. Collins's voice remained neutral, but Naomi detected interest. I'd like to review what you have. I can arrange that after tomorrow's board meeting. I'll make myself available, Collins replied. Evening had fallen by the time Naomi gathered her things to leave. The office had emptied, leaving behind that peculiar stillness of spaces normally filled with activity. As she stepped onto the elevator, Naomi allowed herself to feel cautious optimism for the first time since walking into that boardroom days ago. The truth was within reach. The evidence was secure. Tomorrow, the board would face what had been buried for decades. Justice seemed possible. Not just for her, but for Marcus Johnson. For the families who lost their homes. For her mother, who had carried this secret for too long. Naomi walked to her car with purpose in her step. After all these years, the truth would finally surface. Naomi arrived early the next morning, briefcase heavy with evidence, mind focused on the day ahead. Her steps faltered as she entered the lobby. Employees huddled in tight groups, conversations dying as they noticed her. Screens throughout the building displayed financial news channels, all showing Wexler and Dunn's stock in free fall. Ms. Bell! Her assistant rushed toward her, face pale. The board's called an emergency session. They've been trying to reach you. Naomi checked her phone. No calls, no texts, no emails. Someone had blocked her communications. What's happening? She asked, striding toward the elevator. It's all over the news. They're saying... The assistant swallowed hard. They're saying you manipulated stock prices, that you knew about your appointment weeks before it happened and positioned investments to profit. The elevator doors opened to reveal Miles Sutton waiting inside, his lawyer's face a mask of practiced concern. "Naomi," he said, voice dripping with false sympathy. "The boardroom. Now." The executive floor buzzed with barely contained chaos. Staff averted their eyes as she passed. Through glass walls, she saw the boardroom packed, not just with board members, but with legal counsel and PR staff. Dean Rourke stood as she entered. His face showed perfect, rehearsed regret. "Naomi, I wish we weren't meeting under these circumstances." On the table lay printouts of what appeared to be her emails. Beside them, financial charts showing suspicious trading patterns. "What is this?" Naomi demanded. Grant pushed a tablet toward her, displaying a breaking news story. "New CEO accused of securities fraud. Wexler and Dunn in crisis." "Emails have surfaced," Dean explained, voice carrying for the benefit of everyone present, "showing you discussed your appointment with outside parties weeks before the board vote. During that same period, unusual options trading occurred that benefited those parties substantially." "That's impossible," Naomi said. "Those emails are fabricated." "They came from the company's server," Miles Sutton interjected. "The metadata is intact." "Where's Tessa Reed?" Naomi asked, scanning the room. Grant's smile tightened. "Missy, Reed has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into data security breaches." "You mean silenced," Naomi corrected. A board member Naomi had counted as potentially supportive cleared his throat. "Given the severity of these allegations, we've voted to temporarily suspend your executive authority while an independent investigation proceeds." "This is a setup," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "I have evidence of long-term financial fraud orchestrated by current members of this leadership team. Fraud connected to the redevelopment project 25 years ago. Ancient history," Dean dismissed, "and convenient timing for such accusations." Another board member slid a document across the table. "Your login credentials accessed sensitive financial projections the night before you were announced as CEO. The trading patterns match those projections precisely." "My credentials were stolen," Naomi insisted. "Tessa has proof of system manipulation." "Ms. Reed has already been interviewed," Miles said. "She was unable to provide substantiation for those claims." "Unable or prevented?" Naomi wondered. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made her stomach drop. "Former janitor invents corruption stories to help daughter's faltering CEO position." The article quoted sources close to the company, claiming Loretta Bell had a history of making unsubstantiated accusations against Wexler and Dunn. It painted her mother as bitter, unstable, and manipulative. They had gone after her mother. The line had been crossed. "Unfortunate that family matters are being dragged into this," Dean said, noticing the article on her phone. "The press can be so invasive." Naomi recognized the trap now. They hadn't just prepared for her appointment. They had orchestrated it, positioning her to take a fall they had engineered long before she walked through the door. "Where's Evelyn Price?" Naomi demanded. Uncomfortable glances exchanged around the table. "Mrs. Price suffered a stress event this morning after the news broke," Grant said. "She's under medical care." "Silenced, too. We'll need your key card and passwords," Miles said. "All company devices must remain here." "The board expects your resignation by tomorrow morning," Dean added. "For the good of the company." Naomi stood perfectly still, surveying the faces around her, some triumphant, some uncomfortable. None willing to challenge what was happening. "I won't be resigning," she said quietly. "Then we'll vote for removal," Grant replied. Confidence absolute. "Either way, your time here ends tomorrow." Naomi was escorted back to her office by security, ostensibly for her protection during this difficult time. The transparent humiliation wasn't lost on anyone watching. Her computer access had been restricted. Her calls were being monitored. Her evidence was now locked in a system she couldn't access. Through her glass walls, She watched the company machine pivot seamlessly. Statements were prepared. PR teams mobilized. The stock had already begun to stabilize now that action had been taken against the problem. Afternoon sunlight slanted across her desk as Naomi sat alone, watching shadows lengthen. Outside her office, executives moved with renewed confidence. Dean and Grant walked past, pointedly not looking in her direction. Everything she had built, everything she had fought for, seemed to unravel in hours. They had attacked not just her position, but her reputation, her family, her very integrity. On the screens visible from her office, financial analysts were already discussing leadership instability at Wexler and Dunn. The narrative had been seized and rewritten while she sat powerless to counter it. Naomi Bell, the CEO they had laughed at, was now being erased entirely. The key in Naomi's front door stuck, as if even her home refused to welcome her. She jiggled it twice before the lock finally gave. Inside, her apartment felt cold and unwelcoming. She dropped her bag on the floor, not bothering to hang up her coat, and collapsed onto her couch. Her phone buzzed. Another news alert. She grimaced, but looked anyway. Wexler and Dunn whistleblower claims discredited. Sources reveal janitor with history of workplace complaints. The article painted Loretta as a disgruntled ex-employee with documented performance issues who had been let go after multiple incidents. All lies. Her mother had worked tirelessly, silently, with dignity for years. Now they dragged her name through mud to protect themselves. The phone rang. Loretta's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Naomi answered. "Don't you dare apologize." Loretta's voice was firm despite the strain. "I knew what these people were capable of. I've always known. They're saying terrible things about you. Let them talk. I'm not afraid of them anymore." Loretta paused. "My neighbor brought over a casserole, said she was sorry for what those awful people were doing to me. People know lies when they hear them, Naomi. They're trying to force my resignation by tomorrow morning. And what will you do?" Naomi closed her eyes. "I don't know yet." After hanging up, Naomi checked her email on her personal device. Dozens of messages from reporters seeking comment. A few supportive notes from former colleagues. Then one that made her heart stop, from an unfamiliar address with the subject line, "Don't resign." She opened it cautiously. "I copied everything before they locked me out." Meeting? Tessa. A small flame of hope flickered to life. Naomi replied with a coffee shop address far from the office, and a time late that evening. She spent the next hour checking for surveillance, changing cabs twice before arriving 30 minutes early. Tessa slid into the booth looking exhausted, constantly glancing over her shoulder. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, "but I couldn't just watch it happen." She passed a small flash drive across the table. "Everything we found, plus the backup email archives showing they altered your correspondence. The timestamps don't match the server logs." "How did you get this?" "I've been backing up everything since you started the audit. They don't pay much attention to compliance analysts. We're furniture to them." Tessa's hands trembled. "They put me on administrative leave this morning. Threatened me with legal action if I spoke to anyone. Why risk it?" Tessa looked down. "My grandmother lost her home in that redevelopment project. She never recovered. Died thinking she'd done something wrong to deserve it." Naomi felt the weight of decades of pain in that simple statement. "Thank you. There's more," Tessa said. Evelyn Price didn't just have a stress event. Dean ordered security to block her from entering the building this morning. They physically prevented her from attending the emergency session. Her collapse happened right after. "Is she stable but sedated, according to what I heard?" Tessa glanced at her watch. "I need to go. They're monitoring my movements." After Tessa left, Naomi plugged the drive into her laptop. Files appeared, transaction records, altered documents, access logs showing exactly who had modified what and when. The evidence was damning, But without a platform to present it, it meant nothing. Naomi tried calling Evelyn's personal number but got no answer. She was truly alone. Back at her apartment, Naomi stood at her window, watching the city lights. The Wexler and Dunn building dominated the skyline, its illuminated logo a symbol of power and corruption. Somewhere in that building were men who thought they had beaten her, who believed they could erase her and her mother from history, just as they had erased so many others. Her phone buzzed with a text from Grant Holloway. "Your resignation letter is expected by 8 a.m. Legal has prepared a draft with acceptable terms." Naomi didn't bother responding. Instead, she opened her laptop and began typing. Not a resignation, but a plan. She had one card left to play, a provision in the company bylaws that Evelyn had mentioned in passing. Section 14.3, Emergency Shareholder Address. It would be risky. They would fight it. But if she could force a public forum, with shareholders, press, and employees present, they couldn't silence her so easily. The night deepened around her as she worked, her determination hardening with each keystroke. The company had taken everything from her: her authority, her reputation, her dignity. They had attacked her mother. They had silenced Tessa. They had sidelined Evelyn. But they hadn't broken her. Naomi Bell would not resign. She would not disappear quietly. Tomorrow wouldn't mark her defeat. It would be the beginning of their reckoning. As midnight approached, Naomi looked once more at the glittering skyline. The Wexler and Dunn logo shone bright and arrogant against the night sky. She allowed herself a small, determined smile. They had laughed when she walked into the boardroom. They wouldn't be laughing tomorrow. Morning light streamed through the half-drawn blinds of the hospital room. The steady beep of monitors created a rhythmic backdrop as Naomi Bell quietly entered. The room smelled of antiseptic and stale air. Evelyn Price looked smaller than usual against the white sheets, her normally impeccable appearance softened by illness. Yet her eyes remained sharp when they found Naomi. "They told me no visitors," Evelyn said, her voice raspy but firm. "I can be persuasive when needed." Naomi approached the bed, taking in the IV lines and monitoring equipment. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone who's had enough of men telling her what her limits are." Evelyn attempted to sit up straighter, wincing slightly. "They're calling it stress-induced hypertension. A convenient diagnosis when you want to discredit a woman's testimony." Naomi pulled a chair closer to the bedside. "They're moving to force my resignation this morning. And will you give it to them?" Evelyn's gaze was penetrating. "No." A slight smile touched Evelyn's lips. "Good." She glanced toward the small closet across the room. "There's a leather portfolio in my bag. Would you get it for me?" Naomi retrieved the slim leather case. It looked expensive and well-worn, the kind of item kept for important documents. Evelyn took it with careful hands. "I wasn't completely honest with you about why I pushed for your appointment," Evelyn said, her fingers tracing the edges of the portfolio. "It wasn't just about your qualifications, impressive as they are." She opened the portfolio and removed a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. The seal remained unbroken, with "Confidential" stamped across it in faded red ink. "Harold wrote this 23 years ago," Evelyn explained. "My husband was many things: brilliant, driven, ruthless when necessary. But in his final years, he was also haunted." Naomi took the envelope, feeling its weight. Not physical, but historical. Haunted by what? By the choices he made, the people he allowed to be hurt. Evelyn's voice grew stronger. "He instructed me to keep this sealed unless the company faced a true leadership crisis involving the legacy division." Those were his exact words. Naomi looked down at the envelope. "And you think now qualifies?" "I know it does." Evelyn's eyes held a mixture of sadness and determination. Harold knew what Dean Rourke's mentor did to secure that land deal. He knew about the diverted pension funds. He knew about the young man who tried to stop it. Your father's friend. Naomi's breath caught. You knew who I was all along. Evelyn nodded slowly. I've known your name since before you finished college. I tracked your career. I watched you rise. I waited until you had the experience, the reputation, and the strength to do what needs to be done. You were preparing me, Naomi said, understanding dawning. All this time. Justice delayed isn't always justice denied, Evelyn said. Sometimes it's justice carefully planned. She gestured to the envelope. Open it. Naomi broke the seal carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Harold Voss's distinctive handwriting. As she read, her expression tightened. The letter didn't contain a full confession, but it acknowledged knowledge of irregularities in the land acquisition process. It named Dean's mentor specifically as the architect of the scheme, and it expressed regret for not intervening. Most damning of all, it confirmed that the whistleblower's death had been handled inappropriately by the company. He knew, Naomi said, looking up. He knew, and he let it happen. Yes, Evelyn said simply, and I let it continue by keeping silent. That burden is mine to bear. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Because accusations without power are easily buried. I needed someone who could not only expose the truth, but survive the aftermath. Someone they couldn't dismiss or destroy. Evelyn reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched Naomi's arm. I needed you. Naomi carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. This isn't enough on its own. No. But combined with what Tessa found and your mother's testimony, it creates a pattern no one can ignore. Evelyn's expression hardened. They're planning to remove you today, but they don't know about Section 14.3 of the bylaws. The emergency shareholder address, Naomi nodded. I found it last night. Good. It hasn't been invoked in 15 years. The board has forgotten it exists. Evelyn squeezed Naomi's hand. You have until 2 o'clock. After that, they'll have changed enough rules to block you. Naomi stood, the letter secure in her hand. Why me, Evelyn? There must have been others who could have fought this battle. Evelyn's eyes held decades of carefully managed pain. Because you understand what it means to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to know the truth and not be believed. She paused. And because your mother deserves to see justice for her friend. The monitor beeped steadily as silence filled the room. Naomi felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on her shoulders. Not as a burden, but as purpose. I won't waste this chance, Naomi said finally. I know you won't. Evelyn settled back against her pillows. Now go. You have a company to reclaim. Naomi left the hospital room with Harold's letter and a renewed sense of clarity. This had never been just about her leadership. It had always been about rectifying a buried injustice. The morning light seemed brighter somehow as she stepped outside, her path forward finally clear. The parking garage echoed with the distant sound of car engines and footsteps. Shadows stretched across concrete pillars as Naomi checked her watch. The dim fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone who passed beneath them in a sickly glow. She'd chosen this spot carefully. Level B, between sections 12 and 13, away from security cameras and curious ears. Naomi heard footsteps approaching before she saw Tessa. The young analyst emerged from behind a concrete pillar, her eyes darting around nervously. She wore casual clothes instead of her usual office attire, jeans and a plain sweater that wouldn't draw attention. Were you followed? Naomi asked, keeping her voice low. Tessa shook her head. No, I took the stairs from 3 floors up, doubled back twice. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her bag. They're saying terrible things about you upstairs. Dean called an emergency staff meeting this morning. Let me guess. To discuss the unfortunate situation with leadership? Exactly that. Word for word. Tessa unzipped her bag and pulled out a small external hard drive. Her fingers shook as she handed it over, but her voice remained steady. It's all here. Everything I could download before they locked me out. Naomi took the drive, feeling its weight. Physical proof of what she'd suspected all along. What did you find? Financial ledgers from the redevelopment project. The real ones, not the versions they submitted to regulators. Tessa glanced over her shoulder before continuing. Email logs showing discussions about handling community opposition. And the access records proving someone from legal logged into your account 3 separate times to plant those fake emails. Miles Sutton? His credentials, yes. But Dean's machine? Naomi nodded slowly. The pieces were fitting together with ugly precision. They've been working together all along. There's more. Tessa lowered her voice further. I found transfer records showing pension funds were diverted to shell companies registered to addresses linked to board members from that time. Some of them are still there, hiding behind newer members. A car engine started somewhere in the distance. Both women paused, waiting until the sound faded away. Naomi reached into her bag and pulled out Harold Voss's sealed letter. Evelyn gave me this. Harold's own words, acknowledging what happened. Tessa's eyes widened. The founder himself? Not a full confession, but enough to matter. Naomi carefully tucked both the letter and the hard drive into her bag. He names Dean's mentor specifically. Says he regretted not stepping in. Will it be enough? Naomi pulled out her tablet and quickly sketched out a strategy. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced precision, mapping out a timeline. Not if we go through normal channels. The board will bury it, discredit us both, and make sure nothing reaches the shareholders. Then how? Section 1403 of the company bylaws. Naomi turned the tablet so Tessa could see. Emergency shareholder address. It's rarely used, designed for crises that can't wait for quarterly meetings. Can they block it? Not if I file it correctly. They'll try to cancel it, but legally they can't if I cite imminent financial harm to shareholder interests. Naomi's voice hardened. Which fraud and corruption certainly qualify as. Tessa studied the plan, her posture straightening as understanding dawned. This bypasses the board entirely, and forces a public session. They can't hide behind closed doors or legal maneuvers. The fluorescent light above them flickered, casting momentary darkness across their faces. When it steadied, Tessa's expression had changed. The fear was still there, but something stronger had taken root alongside it. They'll come after us both, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Naomi didn't sugarcoat it. Your career at Wexler and Dunn will be over. Mine, too, possibly. Tessa took a deep breath. My father worked 30 years at a factory. When it closed, his pension disappeared. They said the fund had investment losses. He died still working at 68. Her hands had stopped trembling. I've been afraid every day since I found those records, but I'm more afraid of staying silent. This only works if we do it in the open, Naomi said. No backroom deals, no quiet settlements, everything exposed to daylight. Then let's do it. Tessa's voice was steady now, matching Naomi's resolve. I'm tired of being afraid. The distant echo of footsteps made them both glance toward the garage entrance. It was time to move. I'll file the notice, Naomi said. Be ready. Once this starts, they'll move quickly to discredit everything and everyone. Tessa nodded. What about your mother? They've already attacked her publicly. She's stronger than they know. Naomi's lips curved in a slight smile. Always has been. They parted ways, Tessa taking the stairs back up while Naomi headed for her car. The weight of the evidence in her bag felt substantial. Years of lies and corruption condensed into digital files and one handwritten letter. Back in her office 40 minutes later, Naomi sat at her desk, the formal notice displayed on her screen. She had drafted it carefully, citing specific bylaw provisions that would make it impossible for the board to legally block the meeting. She'd included language that triggered automatic notifications to major shareholders and regulatory observers. The cursor blinked on the Send button. Once pressed, there would be no turning back. The system would immediately distribute the notice to all shareholders, the board, and required regulatory bodies. The clock would start ticking on a 24-hour countdown to the emergency session. Naomi thought of her mother cleaning these very floors at night, of the whistleblower who died for trying to speak truth, of Tessa, finding her courage after years of fear. She pressed send. The shareholder meeting room buzzed with hushed conversations and nervous energy. Every seat filled, with people standing 3 deep along the walls. Investors in expensive suits sat shoulder to shoulder with employees who had never attended such meetings before. Reporters tapped notes into tablets. Federal observers watched silently from the back, their presence adding gravity to the moment. Naomi Bell stood at the podium, a single folder in front of her. She wore a crisp, dark suit with a deep red blouse, power and authority in every line. The room quieted as she adjusted the microphone. "Thank you all for attending this emergency session." Her voice was measured, calm. "What I'm about to present concerns the future of Wexler and Dunn, but also its past. A past that has remained hidden for too long." From the second row, Dean Rourke's cold stare met hers. Grant Holloway leaned back in his chair, a dismissive smile playing at his lips. "Many of you received materials outlining allegations of misconduct," Naomi continued. "Today, I will show you those allegations aren't just true. They're documented." She tapped a tablet, and the screens around the room came to life with financial records. Let's begin with land acquisitions from 25 years ago. Naomi highlighted a series of transactions. Property bought from black families in the Riverside district for 1/5 market value. The company claimed these were fair negotiations. She switched to another screen. Here are the original documents showing signatures from owners who were deceased at the time of signing. Forgeries, clear and simple. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. The funds to purchase this land didn't come from operational budgets. Naomi swiped to the next exhibit. They came from the Employee Pension Fund, diverted through these shell companies. The screens showed a complex web of transfers, all highlighted in red. Money taken from workers who had spent decades earning their retirement, used to build the expansion that made this company what it is today. Dean Rourke shifted in his seat. Grant Holloway's smile had vanished. When questions arose about these transactions, Naomi continued, a young accountant prepared to report them. He died in what was called an accident days later. Naomi nodded to someone in the back. Tessa Reed walked forward, her steps careful but determined. She reached the front and turned to face the room. "My name is Tessa Reed. I worked, in compliance." Her voice shook slightly, then steadied. 3 weeks ago, I discovered irregular payments still being processed through these same shell structures. When I began tracking them, I found that records were being systematically altered. She held up a tablet of her own. I preserved the original data logs showing who accessed these systems, when, and what changes were made. This includes evidence that CEO Bell's emails were manipulated after her appointment to create the appearance of misconduct. The murmuring grew louder. A woman in an expensive suit, a major shareholder, leaned forward, her expression thunderous. Naomi took over again. "When I began investigating, the same pattern of intimidation and silencing emerged. But there's someone else you need to hear from." From the middle of the room, an older woman stood. Loretta Bell's gray hair was neatly styled, her simple dress pressed and proper. She looked directly at the board members as she spoke. "I cleaned the executive floor at night for 12 years. Most people never noticed me. I was just the woman with the vacuum." Her voice carried clearly. 25 years ago, I heard them planning it all. I heard them laugh about how easy it would be to take that land. I heard them talk about a young man who was making trouble, asking questions. The room had gone completely still. A week later, that man was dead, and a man in a suit told me if I ever spoke of what I heard, I'd lose my job. Maybe worse. Loretta's eyes locked with Dean Rourke's. I had a daughter to raise alone. I stayed quiet, But I remember your face, Mr. Rourke. You were younger then, but you were there." Dean Rourke stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "This is slander. I won't listen to—" He turned toward the exit, but two men in dark suits stepped forward, blocking his path. "Dean Rourke," one said formally, "federal agents are here with a warrant regarding securities fraud and obstruction of justice." Grant Holloway jumped to his feet. "This is ridiculous. She's manipulating you all. Naomi Bell has been planning this takeover from—" "Mr. Holloway." Naomi's voice cut through his, amplified by the microphone. "The evidence shows you personally authorized the tampering of my files and orchestrated the campaign to discredit me. Your digital signature is on every directive." She displayed emails with his name highlighted. "You also arranged for security to lock Ms. Reed out of the building when she found evidence of ongoing fraud, and you personally contacted 3 news outlets with false information about my mother." Grant's face reddened. "You can't prove—" "But I can," came a new voice. Miles Sutton, the company's legal counsel, stood. "And I have already provided my testimony to federal investigators." The betrayal was written across Grant's face. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The room fell into stunned silence. The arrogance that had filled the boardroom that first day, the dismissive laughter, the contempt, had evaporated, replaced by the weight of undeniable truth. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in a controlled collapse. The carefully constructed hierarchy that had protected men like Dean Rourke and Grant Holloway for decades disintegrated in real time. Power didn't shatter. It transferred, shifting like water finding a new course. Federal agents flanked Dean Rourke, one on each side. His shoulders slumped, the confident posture gone. The man who had manipulated finances for years now stood exposed under the harsh lights. Camera flashes captured his downfall in bursts of white light. "Mr. Rourke, please, come with us," the lead agent said, his voice matter of fact. Dean's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, finding none. The board members who had once laughed alongside him now stared at their papers, unwilling to meet his gaze. Near the door, Grant Holloway remained standing, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. "This is a witch hunt," he snarled. "You can't possibly believe—" "I move for an immediate vote to remove Grant Holloway from all operational positions and the board of directors," called a shareholder from the third row, "under Section 4.7 of the bylaws." "I second," came another voice, then another. Hands rose across the room. The vote passed in minutes. Not hours, not days, but minutes. The man who had spent decades climbing to power was stripped of it before he could finish his protest. "You can't do this," Grant said, his voice cracking. "I built this division. Security will escort you from the building, Mr. Holloway," Naomi said calmly. "Your access has already been revoked." As Grant was led away, Miles Sutton sat alone at the end of the board table, sweat visible on his forehead. The company's legal counsel had betrayed his colleagues to save himself, but he still faced the consequences of years of complicity. "I've provided names," he said, his voice carrying in the tense room. "There are others. People who handled documentation for the original land deals. 3 board members who aren't here today who authorized the pension fund transfers." Names tumbled from his mouth like currency, each one a desperate attempt to buy leniency. Across the table, resignation letters appeared one by one. Board members who had sat silent through the evidence now hurried to distance themselves from the sinking ship. They slid their letters forward, avoiding eye contact, gathering their belongings with shaking hands. Naomi watched it all with steady eyes. This wasn't about vengeance. This was excavation, digging out rot to make room for something new to grow. She stepped forward again, returning to the podium as the room settled into an uneasy calm. "Today marks the beginning, not the end," she said. "We start by making amends." Naomi nodded to Tessa, who displayed a new slide on the screen. It outlined a restitution initiative in clear, simple terms. Effective immediately, we're establishing a $50 million fund to compensate the families who were displaced by the fraudulent land acquisitions 25 years ago, Naomi announced. We will locate every person who lost their home, their community, their history. Murmurs spread through the room, not of protest, but of surprise. Additionally, we're creating a pension restoration program for every employee affected by the diverted funds, she continued. With interest. This company was built on their backs. They will not be forgotten again. In the back of the room, Loretta Bell dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. This moment was decades in the making. This company has a choice, Naomi said. We can try to bury this again, or we can become something better. Something honest. The silence that followed felt like a collective held breath. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the room, someone began to clap. The sound was tentative at first, a hesitant recognition. Then another person joined, and another. The applause spread like a wave, building in strength. Employees who had kept their heads down for years now stood, their faces showing relief, hope, even pride. The sound filled the room, drowning out the whispers of the old guard. This wasn't just approval for Naomi. It was the sound of a company's identity shifting, realigning with truth after decades of lies. When the applause finally faded, Naomi nodded once. The work begins now, she said simply, and stepped away from the podium. That evening, after the reporters had gone and the dust had begun to settle, Naomi walked alone into her office. The space felt different now, cleaner somehow, as if the truth had cleared the air itself. She stood by the window, looking out at the city lights coming on in the dusk. For the first time since she'd entered that boardroom, the silence surrounding her felt earned, not imposed. This quiet wasn't the hush of secrets kept, but the calm after justice served. Next morning, the boardroom doors open again, but the energy is entirely different. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls of the boardroom, catching on the polished surface of the table. The air felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the very building itself. The usual tension that had once filled this space was gone. Naomi Bell stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in. Her dark blazer was accented with a vibrant blue scarf. No more muting herself to seem less threatening. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. She moved to the head of the table with measured steps. Not rushing, not hesitating. This was where she belonged. Around the table sat faces that hadn't been there a week ago. Tessa Reed occupied a prominent position, her back straight, confidence growing in her posture. Beside her was Marcus Chen from Operations, who had quietly supported Naomi from the shadows while fearing for his own position. Daphne Williams from Marketing sat with her notebook open, ready to rebuild the company's public image with truth rather than gloss. 3 new board members, all with backgrounds in ethical business practices, completed the circle. Near the back wall, away from the table but present nonetheless, sat Loretta Bell. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, her gray hair crowned with dignity. The pride in her eyes was unmistakable as she watched her daughter command the room that had once mocked her. "Good morning," Naomi said, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you all for being here as we begin the real work." She tapped her tablet, and the screen behind her lit up with a comprehensive reform plan. "Transparency isn't just a buzzword anymore," Naomi continued. "It's our foundation. Every financial transaction over $10,000 will require multiple approvals and be available for internal audit. No more hidden accounts, no more shell games." Heads nodded. There was no resistance, only attention. "Our employee protection program launches next week," she said, gesturing to Tessa. "Ms. Reed will head our new Ethics and Compliance Division with direct reporting access to the board. No employee will ever again fear retaliation for speaking truth. Tessa sat taller, the weight of responsibility balanced by the trust Naomi placed in her. And finally, Naomi said, her voice softening slightly, we address our past to build our future. She moved to a cloth-covered frame that had been placed on an easel near the window. With careful hands, she removed the covering to reveal a portrait of a young black man with intelligent eyes and a determined expression. This is James Marshall, Naomi said. 25 years ago, he tried to stop the corrupt land acquisition that displaced dozens of families. He tried to protect pension funds from theft. For his courage, he paid with his life. The room was silent, absorbing the weight of her words. The memorial scholarship in his name will fund education for students from the neighborhoods we once harmed. The community center being built on reclaimed land will bear his name, and his story will be taught in our corporate onboarding, not as a cautionary tale, but as a standard of integrity. Loretta wiped a tear from her cheek. She had known James, had seen his smile in the hallways late at night when she cleaned the offices, had heard his voice raised in protest the night before his accident. We don't erase our past, Naomi said firmly. We learn from it. We make amends for it. We build something better because of it. As Naomi continued detailing the path forward, a movement at the doorway caught her eye. A young black woman in a crisp suit stood hesitating at the threshold, a folder clutched in her hands. Her eyes were wide, uncertain whether to enter or retreat. Without breaking her rhythm, Naomi paused her presentation and walked directly to the doorway. The room watched as she extended her hand, the same gesture that had once been mockingly rejected in this very room. Please join us, Naomi said warmly. We need your voice at this table. The young woman took her hand, relief washing over her features. Thank you, Ms. Bell. I have the community impact reports you requested. Naomi guided her to an empty chair. Perfect timing. We were just discussing that very topic. The meeting flowed on, purpose replacing politics. Ideas emerged without posturing. Questions were asked without fear. This was governance, not gamesmanship. When they broke 2 hours later, Naomi returned to the head of the table one last time. She looked around the room, at Tessa's determined expression, at her mother's proud smile, at the diverse faces now contributing without hesitation. There was no laughter in the room, no veiled contempt, no power plays disguised as procedure. In their place was something far more valuable: respect, not granted because of her title but earned through her actions, not demanded, but freely given. This was what justice looked like, when it wasn't just served as a moment, but built into a future. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.